Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia, and I work with the Newfoundland and Labrador Public Libraries. I'm really excited to have my friend Trudy Morgan Cole with us today to talk about her new book, and I get to ask her some cool questions. Newfound Reads is a YouTube series that we do where I get the chance to talk to Newfoundland authors or authors who write about Newfoundland things, and you get a chance to maybe get to know them a little bit better. Good morning, Trudy. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Good morning. It's great to talk to you.
It's always lovely to talk to you. I could talk to you all day.
Oh, thank you.
So I sent, we just thought we'd talk a little bit about your new book.
Mhm.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about your new book?
Sure. My new book is Such Miracles and Mischiefs. And it's book two in a series. It's the sequel to A Roll of the Bones, which came out a couple of years ago. Um, and those are the first two books of what I'm calling the Cupid's trilogy, although I am kind of starting to regret calling it that because turns out the action is going to a lot of places besides Cupid's. But the first book began with the story of the founding of the Cupid's colony in 1610 and tracing three fictional characters in against the backdrop of those real events. And this book kind of picks up the story of those three characters who are now on very different paths in very different places, not for reasons not always of their own choosing, and kind of follows their adventures. And it does follow three separate storylines, and then kind of has to weave them together. So
It sounds really complicated from
it is, yeah.
yeah. I
I
don't
mean,
know
I
how
hope it's not complicated to read, but it was complicated to write to try to, to follow these separate storylines.
when I was younger, my mother used to love Catherine Cookson.
Hmm.
And Catherine Cookson writes or wrote historical fiction. And when I was younger, my mother and I used to love to read historical fiction. And you put me in mind a bit of Catherine Cookson because the accuracy that you put into the historical part of your fiction is really important to me. I enjoy a really good historical fiction in terms of I'll read this story and then I want to know everything that there is possible to know about this time in history.
Yeah.
So your historical accuracy, like I said, is always really top notch. And the characters are all really multifaceted and deep and realistic. So if someone were to write your story 100 years from now as a historical fiction, what would you want for them to get right about you?
I don't know about me personally, but I think there's a lot of little details that are really the things that are hardest to get right in historical fiction, I think, is the way, I mean, there's a lot of small details. Like you can look up, I'm always looking up stuff like what would people have been eating for breakfast, or if this person's getting dressed, what kind of clothes would they be putting on? Um, and you can research all of those details and hopefully get them right, although it's easy to make mistakes. But I think what's harder sometimes is to get into the head of the way people think. And so if someone was right, well, for example, if someone in 100 years was writing a novel set in this particular time in history that we're living through right now, and say people like us, in year two of a global pandemic in St. John's, Newfoundland, I think it would be hardest to get into the heads of how we're thinking about things and our attitudes and other things like, even stepping away from the COVID, which anytime I can step away from thinking about that is great. But thinking about
Yes,
things like how we interact with technology and with the internet. Like I assume that's going to be very different in 100 years,
I hope
whatever
so.
people's relationship with technology is. So for them to think back to the way it was for us and that awareness of what it felt like to get up in the morning and check your phone and like what people refer to as doom scrolling, where you're just like scrolling through your feed seeing all the terrible news and terrible opinions. Like, would somebody in 100 years be able to capture what that felt like, or would their relationship with their technology be so completely different that they wouldn't be able to soak into kind of how that feels for us? And I think that's, for me, that's always the biggest challenge is writing historical fiction, is not getting the facts straight, although that is really important, but trying to imagine how did these people think about the historical moment that they were part of when they didn't even realize, they didn't even have the perspective to realize the bigger picture of what the things they were doing were going to look like. How did it seem to them at the time? How did they feel about it? So
So, that to me, that is really the crux, I think, of what makes your historical fiction really good is because I feel like these people are real. They're relatable to, like, they're not totally foreign and alien to me as, I'm thinking that, we would be to them, right?
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and I find dialogue is really important to me as a reader to be able to feel close to the characters, feel included in the story. And when writing historically accurate conversations, how do you know how people would have talked? And how do you balance that accuracy with making it readable to today's readers?
I don't think you ever actually do know exactly how people would have talked. The closest you can get is reading things that were written at the time. But a lot of what was written at the time was not written with really realistic dialogue. Like, I mean, we've all read Shakespeare, but most of what Shakespeare wrote, was written in this very elevated language and poetic iambic pentameter, which is not how ordinary people talked, even at his time.
Really?
Language
Oh, wow.
but the language was really different, and you can certainly get a flavor of that by reading things written at the time. But I feel like with writing dialogue for historical fiction, there's different ways to approach it. There are writers, modern writers who write really, really authentically. And try to make it as much as possible like how people would have spoken then. And then there are others who don't worry about that at all and just make the dialogue very modernized and have people using almost contemporary slang. I kind of wanted to steer a middle ground between those two because if it's really, really authentic, that's great, except that it can be difficult for a modern reader. It's hard to soak yourself in the story if you feel like the language is a barrier. So it's Rachel Caddish, who wrote a wonderful novel called The Weight of Ink, which I really love, which is set in early 17th century England. Talked in, I don't remember, if it was in the afterword of that book or in an article she wrote about how in historical fiction, you're almost creating a third language where the idea is to be not completely authentic, but to make it sound authentic enough and yet at the same time still be accessible. And so that would include things like I did a lot of searches on words to find out, was this word even used in English at that time?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and trying to cut out words that weren't. But at the same time, um, for example, I would love to have used thee and thou the way they did instead of you the way we do, because it's such an interesting. It lends such shades of meaning to conversation because you use thee and thou for more intimate, the people you were more intimate with, just like using tu instead of vous in French. Um, so if you shifted in a relationship from calling somebody you to calling somebody thou, that was a real intimacy,
Oh,
in their
yeah.
relationship, and the opposite. So you can convey a lot of meaning by using that really authentic dialogue, but at the same time, you do that at the cost of it puts up kind of a barrier for the reader. When you see these and thous in a text, it feels like Shakespeare or the Bible. It feels too remote for a lot of people. So I was trying to create that sort of middle ground where I want my dialogue. I know that's not exactly the way these people would have spoken, but it's not exactly the way contemporary people speak either. It's trying to create, yeah, I guess this sort of third language that is
Yeah. Or a
authentic
bridge,
enough.
kind of like a,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, to take us back to that time, but recognizing that it's not the same as our time. People didn't speak the same way, or in some ways, they didn't think the same way.
I love that. Yes, no, and I do like that about your books because I feel that it's readable, but it's also I feel like I'm in that time when I read your books. So I feel like I've been transported back into this other time, but it doesn't feel like it's totally alien or foreign to me.
Thank
It's
you.
yeah,
That's the goal. Yeah, it should
yeah,
feel
yeah. No, I do.
different
I love.
enough, but yeah, not
And
so
that was
different.
something that my mother and I, like, before my mom passed away, she used to love to read historical fiction. And when I was away from home, wherever in the world I was, she would read a book and then she would write to me when you used to write. letters
Yeah,
to
yeah.
people. Uh, she would write to me and tell me what she'd been reading. And so I would find that book wherever I was, and I would read it, and then I would write back to her what I had thought of the book. And so we had like a little letter book clubby kind of
By
discussion
letter.
thing.
That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
So our very last question, speaking of
Okay.
dialogue, have you ever written a bit of witty or funny dialogue that you wish that you could use in real life conversation? And
I don't, yeah, go ahead.
do you have an example if you did?
I don't think I do have a specific example. I really thought about this one. And I don't know that anything specific comes to mind, but what I think is really great about writing fiction is that you can give characters that presence of mind to say the right thing in the moment that you wouldn't think of yourself. And I think of in A Roll of the Bones and Such Miracles and Mischiefs, my character Nancy Ellis, who is a relatively powerless person. She is, you know, she's a woman, she's a servant, she's very lower class. She ends up in the colonies, not entirely against her will, but very much something she's not enthused about. Um, and she's put because of that in a lot of situations, particularly with men, in both books, where she is at a real disadvantage and very powerless. Um, and she is able to, make these comebacks and say these things that even she recognizes, particularly early in the second book. There are times when she should keep her mouth shut because talking back is going to get her in trouble. Um, but I think sometimes I do have her say the things that you wish you could say in those moments when somebody, says something incredibly offensive or makes a very offensive advance or whatever. And then the flip side of that is much later, no spoilers, in Such Miracles and Mischiefs, there's a moment where she is in a very emotional confrontation with someone who matters to her a lot. And she is able to articulate and say, kind of, here's why I'm so angry at you. Here's what I'm so upset about. And I think in real life, in those moments, we often can't. We find that so hard to articulate, and only later say, "Ah, here's what I should have told him," to
Yeah.
put that all together. So it is a real pleasure in fiction to be able to make people more articulate than most of us are able to be in real life.
Yeah,
I
because
hope
when you're in the heat of the moment or like in the heat of emotion, your brain does not function. It
absolutely
does
not.
when
No,
you're
and I think
calm.
that's one of the big differences between fiction and real life is that people in fiction, are able to access those things because an author has time to think of them, whereas in real life, sadly, you don't often.
Yeah. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and being part of our Newfound Reads series on YouTube.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure.